So please feel free to come to the mic following my speech to share a fond memory. I'm very much looking forward to hearing each person's story about my dad, to throw back some Miller Lights, to laugh my ass off, and I'm sure to cry. Because I rarely see many of you and have only talked to a few since his passing, I am grateful for this opportunity to hear stories about him. So I will start by telling my story. My hope is to guide you through a story filled with love and inspiration, two qualities that were shining characteristics in my dad. My dad taught me many things at a young age. We were the best of buddies. I admired and looked up to him so much that I didn't even mind when he trained me to be his official Miller Lite server. Yes, at a young age, I was the one fetching the Miller Lights. I did it happily because that meant I was able to hang out with him. It was funny because after I moved away, he was kicking himself for not training Buddy how to do it. Little did either of us know at the time, my Miller Lite server training ended up being a vital skill to keeping him comfortable in his last days. I had a special kind of relationship with my dad, one that few people have with anybody. He knew me better than most people know themselves. He was not only my dad, but also my best friend. The kind of love he gave was endless. We spent many hours in the car driving back and forth for hockey games and to practices. We both cherished that time. The car was a safe haven. It was a place to expand our minds, to talk about our personal problems, the problems at school, at hockey, and even at work for him. Those years on the road, my dad engraved into my head the importance of working hard, enjoying what you do, being loyal, and simply loving the shit out of the people you love. Now, I may be biased because I'm his daughter, but I believe that's how he lived his life and why he lived so abundantly in his short 64 years. If you may not know, my dad was first diagnosed with a rare kind of leukemia back when I was in high school. It was a very difficult time. He was so young and he was so strong. We didn't see it coming. The word cancer changes when it becomes relevant to your immediate life. It's no longer the thing that kills many people. It's the thing that could kill the person that you love the most. As many of you know, my dad had a gift for fixing things. He was a problem solver. But unfortunately, you can't problem solve yourself out of cancer. So, at that time, he did a week of chemo, spent a few days in the hospital, and went into remission. I'm a true believer that out of any tragedy, you can find beauty. My dad's first hospitalization was a very uncomfortable experience for him. But that was the moment I realized I wanted to help, and not just as a family member. I wanted to be the one that was there caring for the people on their toughest days in the hospital. And so, my journey began. In high school, I didn't have the best of grades, but that was okay because neither did my dad. We were street smart, and we would figure out a way to get that nursing degree. So we devised a plan to give me the best chances of getting into Michigan State. Woo woo. We executed that plan perfectly. I struggled for a year or so academically, so me and my dad devised a new plan. A couple more. It was after years of hard work and multiple failures, but I finally got that nursing degree. I'm part of the lucky few, the lucky person that had an incredible presence like Denny cheering me on every step of the way. I'm sure many people in this room understand what I mean when I say that. He was the go-to guy for advice. He knew how to fix a problem so a goal could be achieved. I believe that mindset is why he was so successful in business, with his family, personal life, and his hobbies. I've never heard of someone talked of so highly and so often of as my dad. As many of you know, my dad was highly intelligent. Some people like to look inside the box. Some people look outside of the box. He did both, but he had his own box with other ideas that no one could understand. Again, this was another mindset that was vital to his happiness in the very end. So, we'll fast forward a few years. It was a few days before Christmas, or it was a few days after Christmas of 2015. Me, my dad, and Buddy were up north. We were throwing back a bunch of Miller Lights. As far as we knew, my dad was in remission from the colorectal cancer he previously battled in 2013. He had recently finished 6 months of cleanup chemo and wanted a break from it all. As the evening progressed and the alcohol soaked into our brains, my dad had a very frank conversation with me. He was very aware that his cancer would likely come back, and when it came back, he didn't want to do chemo again. Foregoing life-saving treatment is contrary to what many in our culture believe, We put so much faith in medicine and doing everything we can for a few more days. The sad truth is we can get pretty beat up along the way. Denny wanted quality in his days and not quantity. In his words, he did not want to ride the chemo train. He initially began by saying he'd hoped for 5 years, and the more we talked, he started saying he hoped for 2. Doing the math in my head didn't seem like any time at all. I wanted him to have more hope. I needed him for the important things, like my first nursing job, walking down the aisle, being a grandfather, the big stuff you need your best friend and your dad for. We didn't have that time. We had 2 horrific and beautiful years together. Horrific because cancer is awful and painful and a tough way to die, but beautiful because we all did it together. We made the arrangements and had the time to accept his fate. Few people are given that opportunity. From that initial conversation, I took it upon myself to be my dad's advocate and occasional nurse. When his cancer came back and we were told it was terminal, we gathered as much information as possible, treated a few of his acute, soon-to-be chronic ailments, and made yet another plan. This plan was to get the hell out of the hospital and drive up north. We were so fortunate to have our last 2 trips up to the UP that summer. Over time, my dad physically became sicker and weaker. The disease was taking over his body, but nothing would hinder that beautiful mind. It was the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018 when I noticed he really began to decline. It's something we often see in the hospital, but it's different with a family member. Myself, Brad, Elise, and the dogs had a plan to head up north for some snowmobiling. I had visited my dad earlier that week and left with an ominous feeling. He had been so sick for so long that it was difficult to accept his current decline. We had plans to leave on a Thursday after work. I messaged Brad that morning and asked him if we could spend that Sunday at home when we came back. It just didn't feel right not seeing him that weekend. Brad responded by suggesting that we instead drive up to the UP that night, we go home and see him. I'm forever grateful for his suggestion because once we got home, I knew I wouldn't be leaving. It was a Thursday night. He passed away that Tuesday. The next morning, we had a lot going on. His body was starting to shut down, but mentally he was still our Denny. So that night, I went to bed thinking things were okay. And all of a sudden, my mom came bursting into the room, like, Jess, you gotta wake up. You gotta come downstairs. He's falling out of the bed. And I'm like, what? Shit. So, sorry, I know there are kids here. Shit. So I ran downstairs. Like, Dad, what are you doing? He was like halfway out of the bed. He was like, man, I gotta tell you about that. That was one crazy dream. I can't tell you how relieved I was that he made light of that situation. After this incident, I knew it would be me and him working toward our next and our last goal together. And that goal was keeping him comfortable in his last days. So, after devising this plan, I found myself a mattress, some pillows, and camped up on the floor by him. I then set alarms so I could wake up at intervals to give him pain medication. Saturday came and went, but all I could think was that it was great having all 4 of us together. Sunday was a bit different. We were faced with a new battle. At this point, he was very uncomfortable. It was extremely difficult for him to swallow even 1 milliliter of liquid pain medication. It was a new experience for me because working inpatient, we can give all of these comfort medications through the IV. So we called up the hospice nurses. Fortunately, they sent a nurse that was really incompetent. Being the protective daughter and nurse, I was very unhappy. Won't go into it. But I fought this lady tooth and nail on her suggestions that I knew were not right for my dad. He needed a certain kind of pain patch to keep him comfortable and to ease him through this process. We ended up getting the patch. I won. The patch was a game changer. This finally gave him enough pain relief so he could rest comfortably. The next day, a nurse practitioner came over and did her assessment. She was amazing and gave us a ton of great advice. While my dad did not look like the same strong and commanding guy, she talked to him with all the respect and dignity he deserved. At this point, my dad was unable to speak. His voice was so weak and his throat was so dry It took time to understand what he wanted to say. But this lady took the time to really assess what he needed. I could tell he immediately trusted her. He had one question for her. We were trying to understand what he wanted, but we couldn't quite figure it out. He looked at me and motioned to bring a pen and paper. His writing was a little difficult to make out, but it was clear what he was asking. In big letters, it said Miller Lite with. A bunch of scribbles after. He was asking if it was okay to have Miller Lite with all the narcotic medications he was on. The nurse practitioner said, yes, have your Miller Lite, please. Enjoy what you need to enjoy. It's not going to interfere with anything. It'll make you more comfortable. It was a great moment for us. We knew he was keeping his spirits high, and he was not scared. It was interesting. The nurse practitioner made a career of tending to the dying. She looked at us and asked what he did for a living because she was so impressed by his mind at the end. That night was the last night we were able to communicate with my dad. Being the ever diligent Miller Lite server, I fetched him a 1 milliliter syringe of Miller Lite. The next morning, I woke up on the cushions. I had accidentally slept through my alarms, but I felt okay with it because we put an extra pain patch on. This was his last morning, and we all knew it. The hospice team came over and spent some time with us and commented many times that he looked comfortable. At that point, I knew me and my dad had executed our final plan and achieved our last goal together. This day, we were so very fortunate to all be together. We pulled up chairs by his bed. We opened some wine. Uncle Jim came over. Brad got a case of Miller Lite. And we did one last cheers of Miller Lite together. Me, my mom, Brad, Elise, and Uncle Jim. And of course, my dad. I was lucky to be able to serve him his last taste of a cold Miller Lite. That night, the Blackhawks were playing, so of course we had the game on. The Hawks were tied 1-1 near the end of the second period. Right before the end of the second period, the Hawks scored and they were up 2-1. Fate would have it that it was our guy Denny, a guy that my dad's been rooting for forever. Some of you might know his father from Sentinel. So my brother told him the Hawks scored and they were up, and he told him who scored. It was shortly after that that the period ended. And shortly after that, my father took his last breaths. They say that sometimes people choose the moment when they want to let go. The Hawks ended up winning that game, and I think my dad knew they would pull off the W. Either that, or he knew the Hawks would shit the bed the rest of the season. And so, we arrived to an end, the end of a story about a father and her daughter. But I don't really believe in ends, and so we come full circle. We gather together today to celebrate the man and the legend, Denny. The guy who is now a symbol of love, loyalty, respect, strength, and ingenuity. His intelligence and wit will always be remembered and admired. I believe his way of life will be passed down for generations. And on that very long and emotional note, I would like to make a toast to my dad. Also, to my mother for putting all of this together. To Brad for gracefully stepping into the role that my dad left. And to all of you for the stories that I'm very much looking forward to hearing about my dad tonight. Here's to you, Dad. Cheers.
Cheers.
And there goes my speech. So feel free to come up and share a story, a warm, fond memory about my dad, something funny, anything you want to say about him, please. We all want to hear it.
All right.
Pass the mic along.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Ballant. I am Mary's brother, one of her brothers. Turn it up. Is better?
I have a really loud voice, so.
Okay. How's this? Does it sound good? Hello, everybody. My name is Tom Ballant. I'm